forward is our Community Arts, Cultural and Heritage Committee have discussed this for a long time, and also with the foundation. I think last week's celebration, that was such a wonderful success, celebrating the 50th year of the anniversary of the hall, certainly for myself showed how strongly the public feels about this building and its architectural style and just the history that it brings. I'll thank Mr. Terrence Williams for coming again tonight and telling us what an international stature this building has. I think as we live in a community, we take things for granted. It's that, that place up over there, that Vernon and over in Darwin, and don't realize that how important it is. And I think the statement is about architecture as a fine art. There was great foresight with the Archival Committee and the Foundation back in 1992 when they designated the building heritage and the lands, because it was not even 30 years old, so that was quite a move to do that. So, but I learned also that the building's significance through the tours we had, and there were many people that came through during this past week, both on the guided tours and self-guided tours. I was quite surprised that I had a little chat on CBC, and people just appeared. They didn't necessarily live in Sandwich, but they just wanted to have a look at this building and see what it was all about. And through the tours, we found that the building, the significance is the fact that it's also connected to its interior spaces. And when you go to the second floor, have a different look next time, and how purposeful the architecture was in their design to maximum the light and the view corridors. Certainly nothing in all the years I'd come here that I was really aware of, how you can look out right out to Swan Lake and all the different funny little nooks and crannies where you stand up on the third floor and you can look down on the piece of artwork that's on the second floor. A lot more than I'd ever considered before. We do have a council policy that says that any alterations that are going to be made to the building, that it needs to go to the Heritage Foundation, the Advisory Side Panel, and the Archival Committee. Of course, the Archival Committee became Arts, Culture, and Heritage. And I think on page 129 is at the top there, says what the value of this changing the bylaw would be, that the updated designation bylaw, in conjunction with a plan for conservation maintenance, future maintenance, the municipal halls, interior features will assist Sandwich staff and residents in efforts to support the original vision of the building, retains its value and character for future generations. And I think that's what's important, because as people age and people retire, you lose that corporate memory. You lose the community memory, and that's what we rely upon in anything, is the people that remember how things were or how they've been done, and not that change doesn't happen, but forget what the original intent was. So I also want to thank the other speakers that came out, and again, showing us the awareness of that alterations and change doesn't mean losing the original intent. Having done a major renovation to Heritage Home myself, I know that the interior, the original spirit is there, but it also is very modern. I often admire Quadra School when I drive by there and think what a wonderful adaptation to many additions being. So this is an important step. Passing this bylaw is, of course, a step to protecting and retaining the heritage values and the character of what we all call the hall. So I hope indeed that you'll all be supportive of this, and we'll look forward to this building as we now as a sort of an icon across the country. Thank you.
Councillor, would you like to move the recommendation?
I could have said that at the beginning, couldn't I? I move the recommendation. Thank you. Oh, now I can speak to it. Thank you.
Councillor Dermott.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm very happy to second this motion. And I would really like to thank Councillor Sanders and indeed speakers Brad Shuga, Ken Johnson and Terrence Williams for the presentation at the celebration, a special council meeting last week. I really thought I knew and appreciated the history of this building and the heritage values involved. And I certainly learned a lot on that evening. And I certainly have an enhanced appreciation of exactly how special this building is. We got a letter today from Bernard von Schumann on Aurelia Street, in which he says, around BC, very few examples of mid-century modern architecture have been protected, and even fewer interiors have been protected. By designing the interior of the building, the council will be protecting a provincially important part of our heritage, and I think it may even go beyond provincially. What we are looking at doing here is establishing protection for the look, feel, and character of this building. Yes, it can change. And it can change at the whim of this council or a future council. But what it will do through designation is not prevent change, but to require careful and sympathetic consideration of the heritage values involved in that change. And I think that's absolutely critical. As Councillor Sanders said, corporate memory fades, and so does council memory. When I've been on this council for about 5 or 6 years, it came to our attention that a lot of the heritage values in this building were being looked after by Mr. Neil Finlow kind of off the corner of his desk, because we had nothing that was being done about it other than that. And he took the time, to his credit, to put together a report saying, there's a lot of things we're doing that inadvertently, that are really not consistent with the heritage values of this building. And they were being done because the heritage values had not been properly identified and established, and the appropriate protections put in so that if changes were made, there could be careful consideration about how to do that. That's exactly what this bylaw does. I think it's very timely. I think it's past time, and I am certainly happy to support it. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Haynes.
So I won't repeat what's already been very well said, but I would like to express my thanks to Councillor Sanders. I always found coming into this chamber with the absence of its windows a little bit of a challenge to me personally. But having gone through the process of listening to the rationale behind the design, and I spoke to Terence Williams about this, and he said, well, Fred, you know, this was designed intentionally not to have windows, because back in the day, the theatre idea, no windows would be distracting, and when they describe all the elements in here, I totally get this building. I totally get this room. This is a fine art expression through architecture. And oddly enough, with this heightened sensitivity, I was visiting some friends at the weekend, and they have a building out in Langford that was designed by John De Castri. And when I told them about this building, they were looking at pictures and comparing notes. It was quite something. I thought, oh my goodness, look at the richness that we have. So I would like to thank Councillor Sanders for getting us to this point, and to everybody who spoke about the heritage of this marvellous building. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Murdoch.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I would be supportive of the designation, and as I said at the Committee of the Whole, I think that it's important that we protect the interior, exterior, and surrounding area of Municipal Hall, and that any changes, because as Councillor Government said, changes can take place, be done in a thoughtful manner that is respectful of the original design intent. I think this will achieve that. I want to echo the comments that, you know, as a young man who used to come into this Municipal Hall, I used to think, well, you know, it's not really much of a Municipal Hall, it's just kind of this concrete building, and yeah, I can see that it's kind of interesting looking, but this is not what you think of as a city hall. I've always respected the interesting design elements of it, but not really thinking much of it in terms of it as a staple of civic governance, a seat of civic governance. And it really wasn't until Mr. Shuya, Mr. Johnson, and Mr. Williams provided their presentations last week that I saw the Municipal Hall anew. That I could truly appreciate the really rather impressive design and construction, the thoughtful design and construction of this building, and that it does contain strong elements that convey that the message of the seat of civic government. But I hadn't really appreciated it before, so I want to thank you three in particular, and members of the advisory committee, Councillor Sanders, and everyone who worked to bring last week's celebrations together and this evening's recommendation together. For my own benefit, at the very least, an appreciation, a new appreciation for this fantastic building, but also creating a legacy for future generations to have the ability to appreciate this very impressive building. And I hope that with the narrative that's now attached with thanks to the work that has gone on this year to celebrate this building, that the message will be clear, that people will have that ongoing appreciation and understand really how impressive this building is and how fortunate we are to preserve it.
Any more discussion? Councillor Price?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I am pleased to support this motion. Unfortunately, wasn't able to be here for the celebration, so I feel that I've been able to kind of tag along and pick up a little bit of the enthusiasm that obviously was shared that evening. I too want to acknowledge Councillor Sanders, who has maintained a steady commitment to this project and has withstood some of the uninformed comments that have come her way from people like myself who also decried the fact there were no windows. So I am glad the timing was such I was able to be here and be a part of this, and I appreciate the speakers tonight who allayed any fears that we have about heritage making it going to be a museum, but allowing it to be a living, thoughtfully changing public space over years. So I too will look with much more interest to this building and work to ensure that any changes that I'm a part of are in keeping with the very strong architectural elements that were highlighted here tonight.
Thank you, Councillor Workman.
Thank you much. I guess I was, to be honest, I'd say leading up to the celebration of the 50th anniversary of this building, I can't say I was just sitting in anticipation of it all. But I have to say, having attended and having heard the gentlemen and individuals that spoke, it has given me an appreciation of what we do have in this hall, in this building, and I appreciate it. Thank you. And I believe many others benefited too. Thank you.
Thank you. Any more discussion? Councillor Plant?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I will support this motion tonight. I am probably the person who caused a bit of a furor, maybe if that's the word, when we made the attempt at an amendment to exclude the council chambers. I'm satisfied that future councils and perhaps even this council could make any changes. I actually really love the rest of the building, the interior and the exterior. I just don't particularly like this room. And that's my subjective opinion, which I'm entitled to hold. That being said, I'm not going to speak against the motion because I do see the value of attempting to preserve it. That being said, if any of my colleagues bring forward an attempt to change this room, I probably would support that, because I do think that as much as the rest of the room is a beautiful building, is a beautiful facility, I don't think necessarily they got this right. I don't think in this day and age we should view our government as theater, whether or not that is a metaphor of light and dark, or it's a metaphor of focused attention. I think that some of the renovations that will be done with the webcasting will perhaps change that, the lighting, and I look forward to seeing that. But in general, I'm supportive with the hesitation comments that I think they could have done different in this room and somehow achieved more. And I also have concerns that we are presenting something. I know we're going to vote in a reasonably short time, likely to go back to what we had as a trial model. And in those trial model, the doors and jambs made of cedar board and glass slate panels were pretty much obscured and rendered useless because we weren't able to enter them. So I'm wondering how we're going to address that as a council when we had that ramp and this door and that door became useless. And so we're going to protect it, but yet we're kind of saying, well, we can just leave it behind there and it'll look okay. So in general, supportive, look forward to in the next 100 years that this chamber perhaps does change.
Thank you. Councillor Haynes, a further comment?
I'll just share one reflection to reassure my colleague. I understand two sides to it, they have to raise them up. so that visually it will look the same. And that's part of the cost that we'll cut the concrete. That was my understanding, that they're going to preserve the look and feel, but just raise them up. Is that correct, Councillor Simons? Did you have any more? Okay.
Okay, we've heard from everybody. I'm also going to support this as well. I've had some difficulty with this, largely because of the coming council modifications that we haven't seen yet, and the public hasn't seen yet either. There's a report that's going to come on December 14th on the proposed changes to the council chambers, and the cost is quite substantial, has been proposed. It's over $400,000, and that in my mind indicates a lot of changes. Having heard from the architects and the speakers, it would have been nice, I think, to have had a discussion around that plan before we did this. But I think that's in conflict with what we're trying to do here, which is trying to not carve something in stone, but to write it down. And I'm swayed by the comments that came earlier about institutional memory. It does fade. And while the council has control, ultimately, if you want to remember something and preserve something, you write it down. In this case, we're establishing this in a heritage bylaw, and it's no different from really any other bylaw. When we celebrated the 50th anniversary of the hall just last week, it was interesting to come out of my office and to walk down and to see the photos that were being hung in our entranceway. And one photo that I didn't expect to see was a photo of the council chamber itself in 1965. And it's a beautiful black and white photo. If you haven't seen it, before you leave tonight, before going out the doors, just go up the steps that are ahead of the doors and take a look at the photos on the right. And it's a fabulous black and white photo, and it's one of those photos where, like a lot of black and white photos, the contrast of it, it's so beautiful. It's even better than the color version, in my opinion. And you look at that photo, and you can see that there have already been a lot of changes to the council chamber. Of course, the chairs are different. The arrangement of the desks is different. These little bumpers on the wall are different. We've got the televisions, the podium is different. There have been a number of changes there. And my feeling is that if a heritage bylaw had been put in place earlier, these changes, I think, still would have come forward. Because largely the chamber itself has been preserved. It has a certain shape. It's made of certain materials. And whether a door is lifted up or down or adjusted slightly, I think it can retain its character. And while I argued before on potential difficulty of going forward with, I believe it was called Heritage Alteration Permit, I think we're just going to have to go into that blindly and try that process out with this chamber. And that's simply how it's going to have to be done. So with that, I'm going to lend my support to the motion as well. And the motion that has been moved is a combination motion to repeal the existing bylaw 6887 and to adopt a new bylaw 9361 to replace that. So with that, I'll call the question on the motion. All in favor? Opposed? Unopposed? That motion carries unanimously. Could I have someone move a motion for a second reading of bylaw 9361?
Second.
Moved and seconded, thank you. I'll call the question. All in favor? Opposed? None opposed? That motion carries. And a third reading, please.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Call the question. All in favor? Opposed? None opposed? That motion carries unanimously. Thank you. That's a big step forward for this building. Let's move on to item E. Madam Clerk, could you introduce this item for us, please?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This next item is the amendment to zoning bylaw to the P1 assembly use. This is zoning bylaw 2003, amendment 2015, number 9358, to amend the P1 zone by prohibiting the use of float homes or other floating vessels as a residence, and the anchoring or moorage of any vessel for a continuous period exceeding 72 hours. Council is in receipt of a report of the Director of Planning dated October 21st, recommending that the zoning amendment bylaw be approved. Letters from the Gorge Tilikum Community Association, October 18th and September 14th, have been submitted to Council, along with a letter from the Portage Inlet Sanctuary called Quits Estuary Society, and 6 letters from residents. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Are there any questions from councillors for staff on the report? Any other questions? Seeing none, I'll ask members of the public, I'll open this up to public input and ask members of the public to come forward if they wish to speak. Are there any members of the public that wish to speak?
Good evening, Mr. Mayor.
Welcome.
My name is Chris James. I'm a resident of Canberra Bay, which I understand is also in the P1 district. If it isn't, then what I have to say is irrelevant, but assuming it is, I just have a few comments I'd like to make. I live at 2726 Hibbins Close, and there are a large number of boats that are frequently moored in the Saanich area of Canberra Bay, and I've been living in that area for 15 years, and every single winter a proportion of those boats, usually most of them, end up on the beach. And some of those are salvaged by their owners, but the vast majority end up breaking up, or in some cases being removed at Saanich Council expense. And I can actually recall, exactly maybe 2 or 3 years ago, Councillor Brush was very helpful in removing, getting removed a very large and potentially damaging boat that was left in front of our property that was probably going to remove our retaining wall. My concern is how this whole issue could be addressed, and certainly a 72-hour mooring period would be very useful. The difficulty is the vast majority of the boats that sit in this area don't have anybody on them most of the time, and at the very least, if there was some way of registration of boats that owners could be actually held accountable or be contacted in the event that something happens, I think this would be an exceedingly useful position to take. How this would actually be managed, I don't know, because I understand when you get boats that break free and end up on the beach, multiple agencies are involved, including Saanich, Fisheries and Oceans. I understand there is actually a Department of Recs, but from when I last spoke to them, they don't actually have any funding to be able to do anything about Recs. And then there's Coast Guard and environmental protection agencies. I think the important thing is that ultimately, any of these boats that are not dealt with, they will end up breaking up because of all the logs that are on the beach. And at the moment, there are, along the Canberra Bay waterfront, 5 boats that are sitting there that have come on in the last few days because of the stormy weather. The one in front of my property was salvageable until a couple of days ago, but now the hull is all breaking up, and of course these boats are full of marine toilets and cookers and all sorts of other odds and ends that will actually create a safety hazard for people using the beach. And at some point somebody is going to have to absorb the cost of doing something about it for public protection as well as aesthetics. And it would be great if there was some way we could actually prevent this whole thing happening, because it happens every year and will continue to do so unless things change. That's what I want to say. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other members of the public who wish to speak on this item? Please come forward.
Good evening, my name is Jack Angus. I am living at 2710 Hibbins Close as well, down in Canberra Bay. Just 3 quick points. I want to just emphasize again what Dr. James said about the wreckage and that all flows from the unregulated moorage that takes place out there. Pure negligence, in my view, in the hands of the owners of these vessels. And they do end up on the beach, and if they've been there 3 or 4 days, there's no way to get them out. Saanich, I think about 3 weeks ago, spent a great deal of money to get rid of one, and currently on the beach is a great big 45-foot ferro-concrete boat that's going to go nowhere. It's right in front of Jarrow Park. That's what Saanich's bill to fix that, and it's just outrageous that the municipality has to put up with that. But the other thing that I'm concerned about in Canberra Bay is the interference that a great unregulated moorage field does with other uses that are popping up these days. There's a terrific amount of dinghy sailing that takes place in the bay. That comes off the beach, off the Jarrow Park area. There's also a lot of kayaking going on and more paddleboarding. And I kind of like the bay being open for those folks to use it for that purpose, rather than have to make their way through a literal minefield of private vessels that are just left there in the public space. If that were to keep place, then my only other prayer is for some enforcement. It's one thing to have a bylaw, it's another thing to enforce it. So we would kind of encourage maybe the department that has to write the check to get rid of some of these wrecks to enforce the bylaw. That would be nice too. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any members of the public that wish to speak on this item? An amendment to zone P1. Calling for a second time. Any members of the public? Calling for a third time? Okay, we'll end the public input period and we'll move it over to council for a decision. Councilor Plant.
I'm just wondering if I can ask staff a question, or if that's permitted now that the input's closed.
Go ahead.
Thank you. Just a question through you, Mr. Mayor, to our Mr. Matanowicz. The question of enforcement is a good question, because it is water-based that we're looking at, and we don't really have bylaw enforcement on the water, as far as I'm aware, unless it's done through Saanich Police. Or can you tell me what bylaw provisions we have for enforcement on the water?
Thank you, through Mr. Mayor. It would be something we would have to manage. We do not have a vessel in bylaw enforcement to deal with that matter. Certainly enforcement issues on the matter, on the water. The zoning bylaw does apply to water, so the proposed zoning bylaw amendment would apply to boats in Cabro Bay as well. It also is zone P1. So it would be a matter of enforcement, and doing that enforcement, perhaps contacting the owners would be the first approach prior to zooming out there on a vessel. I think that would be the first step that staff would take, trying to contact the owners and speak with them.
So, as a follow-up, if I may, so what is the pragmatic nature? If we do need to, if we need to go out and confirm, do we rent a vessel? Do we piggyback on existing Coast Guard or City of Victoria vessels? Or I'm not even sure what methodology we would use to get out there. Can you clarify, please?
I would have to get back to you, have a discussion with our director and bylaw enforcement manager and see what the best approach would be to that.
Okay, so thank you. I'll hold there and then speak when the motion comes.
Sure, I don't have an answer for that, solid answer for that, but the last boat that washed up on the beach involved our CAO, our Director of Engineering, it involved the Police Department, it also involved our Municipal Solicitor, all those being involved. The police do have a dive team. Saanich Police is a dive team, and they have a boat. I'm not sure if that boat was used to go out with the last boat, but I think we should look into this and get an answer for you. Councilor Dermott.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'll move the recommendation.
Second.
Thank you. Any discussion? Go ahead, Councilor Dermott.
You know, this bylaw originally came over issues in the Gorge Waterway, but certainly there have been those long-standing issues in Cabro Bay as well. If we were in a situation where somebody was having a rather decrepit motorhome and was driving down some street and leaving it there for weeks at a time, and then it could occasionally come in and staying in it, it would be gone. We have this special difficulty here of it's out in the water, and also this multi-jurisdictional situation that winds up because many of these owners don't have a lot of financial resources, where when the, I would say almost expected wreck on the beach takes place, Saanich taxpayers get stuck with the bill. The nice way to act, if we could, would be proactive and not leave the boats in a situation where they're going to end up on the beach. We have our own, this bylaw will help, but I think the situation, and the one that happened again very recently in Cabro Bay, points to the fact that we need some help from other jurisdictions who also have authorities there to take some action. Thank you.
Thank you. Any further speakers? Councilor Plant, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So I'm just wondering what we could do to get that information that we alluded to from planning or bylaw enforcement, rather, on how we would deal with this. Because I'm happy to support the bylaw and say, yeah, let's do this, and we don't want this to happen. But we're kind of creating a situation where we don't have any teeth. We don't even understand how we're going to enforce it. It's great that we're going to do it, and right on, but I'd like a little bit more knowledge, so I'm not sure if it's appropriate to ask for a report from planning on how this bylaw would be enforced, if that would be a subsequent motion to this passing. And so I guess the question through you to either our municipal clerk or through our planning director tonight, what would be the best methodology for us to understand how this would be reinforced?
If you want to ask for a report, we do that. There's currently a motion on the floor. We'll have to deal with that first.
Absolutely, so I will, well, I think the staff would like to weigh in as well, if you don't mind, Mr. Mayor. I'd like to hear.
Of course.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and Council. This item would be not unlike any enforcement provision under the zoning bylaw. We could certainly bring back to Council a memo that explains how staff, be it through the bylaw enforcement division, would enact the mechanisms necessary to enforce this provision, how we would undergo that task. We could certainly provide clarification on that provision.
Thank you. I will make that subsequent motion after this.
Okay. Any more discussion on this motion? Councilor Workland?
I think coming back to the bylaw people, and it's just the direction we have given them over the years, they respond on complaints, and coming back to being proactive, complaints almost work against that. So it would be good to get a report back. Thank you.
Any more discussion on the motion? I'm going to support it as well, obviously. I would just like to make a general comment just about the Bay in general. It is a lovely, Caddo Bay is lovely, and it's a lovely place to live. And unfortunately, because of downloading and governments not working together, we have these boats washing up on the beaches. We have beach closures because of the way the sewage treatment system has been plumbed to date. It really is unacceptable.